Midoriya's fears have appeared before him. Bakugou has decided, and he did not decide well, as he announced that he will be marching to Glacia by the time the troops were armed and ready. Preparations have started. The people were taxed heavily again, and General Aizawa has been called. This is what Midoriya has been dreading. General, the green-haired scholar greeted the general as soon as he descended his horse. Aizawa wore multiple emotions, but his air of hopelessness stood out the most. And it truly showed when he started walking with Midoriya towards the throne room. I take it that you have thought many plans for this, General? Midoriya tried to ease the tension. Aizawa scoffed. Of course I have. Not that I didn't have any choice for this matter. You sound like you didn't like this part of the job. Well, Midoriya, I don't think a person who is tasked to send hundreds of people to their death with his plan would like this part of his job. Midoriya gulped, sensing he is not easing the tension at all. Instead, he's only tightening the strain on Aizawa's nerves. But before he could even think, his mouth had opened and sown his words would probably regret. You should stop this then. Aizawa turned and gave him a confused stare, which soon turned into a glare. They stopped walking, and Aizawa had begun to tower over the scholar. Do you think I wouldn't have stopped this if I could? Aizawa seethed. Midoriya immediately backed down and lowered his head from shame. Forgive me, General. It was just... He tried to find a word for it, but from the hesitant in his many emotions, Midoriya feared he could not have any words for his actions. Thankfully, Aizawa backed away, and his glare had been gone. He now holds the same hopelessness look which Midoriya has come to mirror. It is all right, Midoriya. I wish the same thing as you. The general said, I wish a day will come in which our king would finally side to a reason. Midoriya nodded weakly before saying, I'm sorry. But why must you be sorry? I cannot convince him enough. To tell you honestly, General, I am also quite torn upon this matter. I want Yin and her child to be avenged, however. No. Aizawa interrupted him. You, Yin, both of you are not like that. You should want to seek justice, yes, but not at the price of 1,000 soldiers dying. Midoriya's mind wandered towards Yin and yearned to seek answers in her views about Bakugou going to war. He knew his impulsive actions like these were what led her present the idea of a coup, and Midoriya wondered if Yin has enough vulgar to make it true. But right now, Midoriya also knew she was far too broken to even think about this. Whatever reason or lack of hope. I just wish there was another way. It was the silence, and all of a sudden Midoriya was slowly yanked away from his position. Aizawa had placed a hand on his shoulder. There must be, he said, hinting something. My duty is to lead men to their deaths, Midoriya, while yours? Well, yours is to aid reason as to why my duty is not the most ideal. I want you to live up to that. Are you suggesting? Yes. I shall go and speak to Bakugou about my plans. There is no more stopping this part now, but I believe you can still do something. This time, bring reason to Yin. Midoriya is now overwhelmed, but he nodded and watched Aizawa continue onwards to the throne room. When he disappeared, Midoriya weaved off to the opposite direction. He must go and talk to Yin, then perhaps hope will be reckoned. Futile, Midoriya walked hesitantly towards Yin's chambers. He took a deep breath to give him the courage and knocked. The guards let him in and announced his arrival. The scholar accepted to be greeted by Yin herself, but appeared before him to King Lin. Your Majesty, Midoriya bowed. The scholar of Bakugou Katsuki. The king commented sourly, and Midoriya raised a brow at his manner of not greeting him by his name and refusal to call Bakugou a king. Can I help you with anything? Yes, Your Majesty. Perhaps I may be so bold as to ask for Her Majesty's presence? I believe I have an urgent matter to discuss with her. King Lin took a glance at the guards, and it permitted them to leave the room. He then turned to Midoriya with a smug look. Urgent, like the subject of her coup. Midoriya's breath caught up in her throat, eyes wide and terrified. He stared at the unusual passive King Lin. How does he know? Why is he so casual about it? Is Yin in trouble? Questions made his head ache, and he could only stand there. But when the king chuckles, Midoriya's rational thinking came to a halt, and Take regains that he couldn't believe that King Lin may be involved in this ordeal. Peace, Mr. Midoriya. I am not an enemy, he says. Midoriya narrowed his eyes. You're part of this? I am not a part of this, Mr. Midoriya. I started it. The king corrected. And whatever message you wish to impart, my daughter, you may discuss it with me. After all, it's about the coup, is it? Midoriya straightened himself and nodded. You are right, but it must be Yin I must speak with. She must be urgent to commence the coup, or else the kingdom will fall. I know, the raids, the rebellion for the upcoming war, and the said war are coming, and you, a rational person, thinks that the coup will be the only solution to all of this. The king is sharp, Midoriya thought. He is revealed to see that they are of the same mind. Yes, Yin now has all the support she needs. She has the army general's favor, and I am sure the rebels will be on her side too. Very good. Good. The king delightfully smirked. Although I already know all that there is also something you must know. What is it? King Lin pauses to walk towards the door connecting the parlor to the bedroom. Midoriya followed and peeked to see Yin sitting while thinking deeply. Yin already knows what she must do, King Lin said. So, she will do it? Midoriya asked. The king nodded. Tonight, she will confront Bakugou and everything will determine his answer. Confused, the scholar whisper yelled, But you told me she knows what to do. And it all depends on King Bakugou? You don't seem to know your king very well, young man. I'm sure Yin will commence the coup. How? Well, because I know Bakugou Katsuki will, and no matter what, he will choose war. A shadow is looming over Igneous. Yin could feel it, and sometimes she convinced herself she would see it, and even in the dead of night, when shadows hid the dark. But no, this shadow seems to be in her mind, is darker than ever so dark, and it dominates even the night sky. Yin felt it again that night when she heard through the dark halls to go to the study of her husband. She is certain that he is here because she has heard from Uraraka that Bakugou, much like her, isn't getting enough sleep and has been spending his sleepless nights drinking. Again. Tonight, she had hoped he'd too far into his alcohol because tonight she will confront him. She knocked at the door and called out his name. Bakugou didn't answer, and Yin sighed while slowly opening the door. There he was, sitting by the window, a glass in his hand and bottles of scotch on his desk. The sight is unbearable and pitiful, as he had opted to drink away his pain. Katsuki, you called softly. He turned and had no reaction upon seeing her, but he set his glass down. You shouldn't be up this late. He doesn't sound too drunk yet. Maybe the many nights of drinking have rendered him immune to the alcohol. Neither should you. Yin sat on the settee on his side. But let us not dwell ourselves. We both know why we can't sleep. Bakugou was quiet, but he clenched his jaw so hard that Yin noticed it. What are you thinking about? She tried to reach out to him again. Nothing and everything at the same time, answered the blonde. She chuckled dryly. That doesn't make sense. Of course, nothing ever makes sense to anyone anymore. Yin. There was bitterness in his voice, and this time he looked her dead in the eyes. Nothing ever makes sense, because we were doing all right, weren't we? Fucking all right. And all of a sudden... He stopped and laughed painfully. Yin looked down, knowing full well what he feels. She felt like they were tricked. They were given a moment, a short and rare moment, where they were actually happy. And now, they were paying the greatest price of happiness, endless grief. I know. She looked up all tired-eyed. I blame myself for all this, but you told me it's not my fault, so I am just wondering too. Endlessly wondering why everything else has come to this. Bakugou turned his head towards the window again. She knew he's refusing to show his vulnerability. Yin had got up and walked towards him. She then took his hand upon hers. I also know I have lost my authenticity, but I want to hold on to it. And no, I just tell myself that. Her voice faltered, that we would never be truly happy if we don't grieve. So I think that eventually we will get there. We will become truly an indescribable happiness one day. Katsuki, together, we will. We will, he said. I promise you that we will be happy again after I go north. Yin sighed shakily. Katsuki, that's... He suddenly stood from his seat, grabbed his glass, and filled it with scotch again. It is what it is, Yin. I will go to the north and see Todoroki. I want to hear the very words I need to hear directly from him. Words? You speak of words as if you were only here to talk to him. Katsuki, you're going to march our military all the way to the north in a freezing cold, and no man could be that desperate just to talk unless they want to start a war. Are we having this conversation again? Yes. Yes, we are. I know we are suffering right now, but I don't want it to end if it means we'll bring more suffering to everyone else. We are not, Yin. We are only trying to get what we deserve. He then turned his back on her at this point, but she chased after him. The only conflict is that Bakugou never allowed her to reach him. There will be another way, Katsuki. Not a war, not a bloodbath. It will not be a war, he insisted, and Yin's whole figure slumped because she just couldn't believe him. Not when he's mobilizing the whole military to go north. You don't need an army of swords and spears to simply talk. If Todoroki sees the threat of what Bakugou will bring to Galatia, the Northern King will have no choice but to reply in the same manner of message Bakugou sent his way. There will be war, that is certain. It doesn't have to come to this. This is not how we should heal, she muttered loud enough for Bakugou to hear. He gave her no answer, and she looked to see him walking towards her. His hand reached out to grab the back of her head, and he placed a kiss on her forehead before he went to leave the room. And the last words he left her echoed like a lost, grieving ghost. This is the only way. It requires a great amount of patience to be a scholar or an advisor to a king, especially to Bakugou Katsuki. Midori has learned the part of patience ever since then, and he has learned more when he became Bakugou's scholar. But all those years of learning seemed to be in vain, as the very moment, here, Midoriya paced inside his own chambers, wondering and worrying when will the piece of much accepted news come. It hasn't come yet, and his patience is running thin. It doesn't help that minutes after pacing, General Aizawa has come to his chambers with a full parchment worth of demands. Where's the queen? Have you heard from her yet? What is her decision? Each question is wearing a stirring thin. Midoriya might have just exploded if he hadn't breathed in so deep. Aizawa would think he doesn't intend to breathe out. In her chambers. Not yet. Not yet. He answered each question. Aizawa sighed hopelessly. This can't go on. The troops are almost ready. How long until you'll depart? 3 weeks? Right. Midoriya paced and muttered all the words he could fully utter under his breath. Midoriya, Aizawa called, but there was no response. Midoriya. Right. My apologies. The green-haired scholar jumped. I was just thinking. All of a sudden, a knock came from the door, and the two jumped. They scrambled and tried to make it look like they were having a friendly conversation to decide whether it was behind the door, but they didn't have to do it, as it was for Uraraka. The brunette answered and curtsied. Mr. Midoriya? General? Uraraka. Midoriya approached her with a newfound enthusiasm. I expect you've come bearing news. Yes, she nodded. She would like to speak with both of you. Aizawa and Midoriya made eye contact with each other before dashing out into the Yin's chambers. Uraraka let them in, and Midoriya saw the King Lin is not present. They passed the parlor and into the bedroom, where Yin sat at a table. Pieces of parchments were scattered before her, and Midoriya saw they were not paperwork based on the scribbles done by Yin's hand. Your Majesty? The three bowed and curtsied. Yin turned her head and nodded to acknowledge their presence. Aizawa was the first to speak. Your Majesty, forgive me for imposing, but I do hope the reason you called us here is to discuss the coup, she finished for him. The general now looked expectant. Have you made your decision yet? Yin was silent for a moment. Your Majesty? This time she snapped out of her thoughts and finally met their eyes. Midori was baffled by how disheveled she looked. It seemed like she's very torn, much more torn than anyone else in the room. It was very difficult, she muttered and then shook her head. I'm sorry. Why must you apologize, Your Majesty? Midoriya asked. Instead of answering, Yin deserved her gaze to Uraraka. The two shared an understanding and nodded at each other before Uraraka left the room. Midoriya became confused and his stomach coiled. Yin disheveled look, her apology. This could only mean one thing, and Midoriya dreads it. Midoriya? General Aizawa. I have made my decision, Yin said, and I hope you will not hate me for it. Everywhere is loud except Bakugou's head. Even inside the thick, high walls of the palace's throne room, the thumping of feet and spears reached his ears, as well as the cries of the rebels from outside his gate. The rebels shout for the militaria to stop the march, and the material itself seems to hold no valor for their march. They're hesitant. The people, the military, almost everyone, does not want this. But Bakugou thinks differently. He wanted this. He must do this. And by all the gods out there, if this will not happen, he will no longer have any honor or any courage to face anyone, especially Yin. And so, in his silent mind, he refused to hear anything but a whisper akin to his own voice, telling him to go on, move forward, and do not look back. The incompetence will catch up, but he will get what he wants. But alas, the silence fell on deaf ears to the double doors opening and closing. Footsteps followed, but Bakugou did not turn because he had memorized the footsteps of his wife at this point. He remained standing still in front of the two, embellished gold thrones until Yin reached his side. I'm ready to go, his voice echoed. No, you're not, Yin said. He blinked and looked towards her, but she's already making her way in front of him. Her hands reached out and closed the upper button of his shirt. He almost smiled, feeling nostalgic. There. She patted his chest. What would you do without me? He heard the crack in her voice, so he took her hand. Yin is cold and shaking. Bakugou's first thought is that she may be nervous about his departure. Still angry and reckless, he amused. Yin did not laugh. You're not angry and reckless now. Do you think so? Yin was silent. She kept her head down, but she could not hide the frown that was on her face. Don't worry. He attempted to comfort her. Everything will be fine. I will handle this. With his fingers, he lifted her chin up to kiss her forehead. Yin's eyes fluttered closed and she sighed. When they broke apart, the frown is back on her face. I have to go, Yin. She only answered with a nod, and Bakugou forced himself to turn around instead of comforting her as much as he wanted to. Bakugou started to walk towards the double doors, only to stop when it was slammed open. General Aizawa came with Midoriya and a party of soldiers on his tail. Good, you're all here. Let's go, he said, amusing. They were there to escort him. But what happened next startled Bakugou. Aizawa and the soldiers blocked the entrance. One soldier closed the door and locked them. The general raised a hand, a gesture that he should stay right where he stood. Did something happen? The blonde grew more concerned and angry, thinking the rebels might have done something. Your Majesty? You must not leave, Aizawa stated. Uh-huh. Why? This time it was Midori who spoke. What the general meant to say, Your Majesty, you cannot leave. We will hold you here until... Bakugou glared. Until what, Deku? Midoriya said nothing. He looked ahead and stared towards the throne. All of a sudden, Bakugou felt like a raging cold water has been doused all over him. He shivered, with a thought that crossed his mind, because... No, it can't be. But when he followed Midoriya with his eyes, the blonde saw him standing with Yin, between the two golden thrones. Until you surrender. Yin finished for Midoriya, but she did not dare look in his eyes. What? He breathed out in disbelief. What is the meaning of this, Yin? This? She finally met his eyes, and he saw that it has been glazed with something so dark and cold. Is my coupe.